You turkeys pull off!
You must have us confused with somebody else. My name's not Turkey and neither's his.
A series that was cancelled too soon gained a sort of sequel that, alas, was not cancelled soon enough. The ragtag fugitive fleet had at last reached Earth, and boy were they disappointed.
By your command.
Galactica 1980.
Are you crazy? Do you think I'm going to tell you where I live? 327 Harrod Street. But I'm moving just as soon as you finish robbing this bank.
Galactica 1980 was a quick and dirty sequel series to 1978's Battlestar Galactica, where the new show was aimed at a younger audience. In some circles it's been branded as Battlestar Galactica Season 2 and has often been included in syndication packages, but it's a separate series. Think of it as a fork off the main line of Battlestar Galactica. And yes, it's quite forked.
In a moment, Galactica 1980.
The project was called Galactica 1980 even if it only appears on screen in a couple of early episodes. But for clarity's sake, in this video, Battlestar Galactica refers to the original series from 1978, while Galactica 1980 refers to the series that was first screened in 78, 79, 1980. It's also possible to quite happily ignore the existence of Galactica 1980, with perhaps the exception of one episode.
You're the visitor sport, so you can call it.
Brand new silver dollar. Thank you very much.
Honestly though, there's little chance that you'll mistake one for the other. But if it is a challenge for you, Galactica 1980 is the one where Lorne Greene seems to be auditioning for a spot on Guess Who.
Oh, yes, and?
It's several years later and the colonial fleet has finally reached Earth, but unfortunately it's 1980 and humans aren't yet advanced enough to lend any assistance in fending off a Cylon attack. A meeting is convened by Dr. Z, who is a genius wrapped up in an annoying child prodigy genius who is either dressed for a destination wedding or his own funeral.
We are within reach of Earth.
So are our enemies.
Dr. Z projects an image of a Cylon attack on contemporary Earth. But then he goes, psych, it's a simulation of what could happen if the Cylons attacked Earth. Commander Adama sends various colonial warriors on scouting missions to Earth, among them his grandson Troy and his best friend Dillon. On Earth, the pair end up as unprepared as KFC's new raw chicken menu.
How do you do? I'd like to communicate with the Pacific Institute of Technology.
Where they have no idea about money or local slang or anything. They can set their Vipers to invisible mode or even themselves. They have wrist-worn computers to help them with local terminology, and they each have an advanced motorcycle that can of course fly. So despite their orders to remain incognito, if the guys are being hassled by some bikers, they can just fly away. Or if the cops are after them, they can just fly away. Or if they get a flat tyre, they can just fly away. Or perhaps they want to avoid the traffic on the 405, in that case they can fly away. Or they can hastily leave the scene of a murder, run from angry investors after their pyramid scheme has collapsed, or outrun a hitman, hide by an angry... Look, I didn't say they had to do this, I just said they could have, hypothetically, if they had wanted to. Those bikes were perfect getaway vehicles, just so long as you don't stray too close to a firing range where people are shooting at clay pigeons.
Maybe I can give you a lift.
Oh, does your machine fly too?
Troy and Dillon meet up with a local television reporter, Jamie Hamilton, who gets sucked into their world after they're branded terrorists, kidnappers, and thieves. They're all misunderstandings. Sort of. Jamie hitches a ride with the boys back to the fleet where Jamie will be full of wonder at all of the strange and unreal things she's seeing for the first time. Things like spaceships, aliens, and Commander Adama's beard. He tasks the trio with stopping the renegade colonial warrior Xavier from changing history after he travels back in time. So far, so barely adequate. But from the 4th episode on, we have The Scouts. And that's where this series goes from being a disappointing sequel to Battlestar Galactica into an incredibly disappointing one.
They're called waffles. You put some syrup on it and they taste real good.
They look like the floor of the Galactica.
A stock footage attack on the fleet sees Adama send a group of Galactica's kids to Earth, where Dillon and Troy dress them up as a troop of scouts, and these scouts have the equivalent of superpowers. They have a strong arm, they can jump really high.
Now, will you stop that?
Plus, they have the superpower of really elevating my blood pressure by being so irritating.
Because that's what Boy Scouts wear.
You think you have problems. I'm not even a boy.
It's not all bad though, with a two-part story detailing a damaged Cylon ship heading for a crash landing on Earth, which gives us the image of a Centurion and a humanoid Cylon wandering around New York on Halloween. And of course, the last episode of the season and the series featured a bittersweet coda to perhaps the most popular character of Battlestar Galactica, and at the same time managed to deliver one of the best episodes of anything branded as Battlestar Galactica. No, seriously, for reals.
I'll expect some form of entertainment.
Captain Troy is the grown-up adopted son of the late Captain Apollo. In the original series, he was known as Boxy and was played by young Noah Hathaway, but as a grown-up, he's played by Kent McCord, who at the time was best known for having starred in 7 seasons of the cop show Adam 12. Troy is given to stoicism, where he does a fantastic impression of a waxworks figure that's holding its breath, trying not to activate a motion sensor security light. McCord plays the role very straight down the line, where he's got a serious job to do, and by thunder he'll play almost every scene almost totally deadpan.
Yes.
Incidentally, I once had a serious accident on a motorbike where I broke an arm and a leg, but the x-rays later revealed that I had also Kent McCord, so that took a lot of physiotherapy to straighten out. Kent McCord would go on to make guest shots in many series including Sequest and Farscape, and more recently voiced a character in Starfield.
I hope these people are good.
In an era where many of these shows had the guy with the dark hair paired up with the guy with the lighter hair, and one of them is quite serious and the other occasionally cracks jokes, Dillon is Troy's partner, where he's both the guy with the lighter coloured hair who would also offer amusing comments on the situation.
Life or death situations from people we've come to help.
The way you tell a pair apart is Troy has the dark hair and a dark jacket, while Dillon has lighter hair and a lighter jacket.
This is Dillon. It works.
Though, if by some chance there was a terrible explosion and you could only identify them by their chin dimples, then the coroner might have to flip a coin.
Troy, this is frightening. I haven't seen anything like that since the planet Gorgon.
Barry Van Dyke would also later star in the 4th season of Airwolf, a season whose existence most Airwolf fans will refuse to acknowledge. Barry Van Dyke would later co-star with his father Dick in Diagnosis Murder.
Maybe they'll let me take the controls for a while. What do you think? I wouldn't even let you.
On Earth, they'll be assisted by Jamie Hamilton, played by actress Robyn Douglas. She was a news reporter always on the trail of a hot story, with a skerritt of prerequisite moxie and gumption of a stereotypical journalist, but then she'll also get roped into babysitting scouts from space.
The child is a genetic mutation.
A what?
In early episodes with a time travel bent, Jamie was there to provide historical context to the 2 colonials from space.
Of course, the V2. It almost changed the course of the war.
But once that element was removed from the series, Jamie's career as a sitter really took off.
We have at last found Earth.
Lorne Greene reprised his role as an older Commander Adama, now wearing a weirdly fake beard for reasons best known only to Greene and his agent.
Is that true?
Yes, that is true.
Herb Jefferson Jr., playing Colonel Boomer, also returns in some episodes. The Galactica is rarely the focus of a Galactica 1980 episode, and so scenes on the ship are usually fleeting in nature. Adama's chief advisor is the mysterious Dr. Z, who's played by a number of child actors. Dr. Z would provide analysis of the current situation and offers suggested courses of action, though Z is really the one who runs the show, with Adama seemingly unable to function without Z's counsel. Did Dr. Z ever tell you that beard looked real?
That is odd.
Dr. Z was first played by ex-Brady Bunch cousin Oliver Robbie Rist, and later by an American child actor, Patrick Stewart. Though he has an English accent, he's not that Patrick Stewart. One colonial officer, Xavier, disagrees with Dr. Z's authority within the fleet and decides to go it alone, where he has a plan to influence Earth's development to make them better able to defend themselves against the Cylons, and in the process, greatly helping the colonial fleet. Though that plotline is quickly dropped like a hot elephant's turd.
How can you be so sure?
So far, none of this, the scouts aside, sounds particularly bad.
They confound me.
But the scouts, who featured heavily in 4 episodes, are incredibly grating to anybody over the age of 9. And for a show with a lot of child actors, they didn't seem to look too hard to get really good child actors. The Cylons are about, but they're more of a background threat in most episodes. The real action takes place on Earth, where Dillon and Troy aren't just fish out of water, but they're fish from another planet that has no water. And then after 9 episodes of Dillon and Troy faffing about on Earth, The final episode doesn't feature them at all and instead has Adama telling Dr. Z a story about how he was found. It's a story that involves a missing colonial warrior named Starbuck.
We all love you.
How did we go from a ragtag fugitive fleet to a series about two dudes in puffy coats racing around Southern California on their motorbikes? Did we do something to offend the oh great lords of Kobol? Battlestar Galactica had launched in 1978 to massive ratings, but the continuing series ratings were more very good than massive. The series cost a lot per episode compared to, say, a sitcom garnering similar ratings. And Battlestar Galactica was cancelled at the end of one season.
I don't believe it. It's true. It's official.
Angry fans mounted a letter-writing campaign to try and save the show. Its replacement in the time slot, Mork and Mindy, was already a hit show with a much smaller budget, but it had failed to get anywhere near the same sort of ratings, and so the American ABC network went back to Universal and Galactica's creator, Glenn A. Larson, and asked them to revive Galactica, but as a more kid-friendly series for an early evening time slot. Oh, and it should be achievable on a smaller budget.
Maybe not for long.
Ratings are a funny old business. They're important to television networks since a show's rating is how the network sets the rates for advertisers. A low rating show means they have to charge less for commercial time compared to a hit show. The cost of licensing a show from a studio also comes into play. A more expensive show may rate the same as a cheaper show, but the network cannot charge more for ad time for a more expensive series. So a really expensive series does need to rate incredibly well to justify its upkeep.
I'll explain the basic rudiments of Earth's transmission while you're gone.
As an aside, Auntie Beryl once totaled a Camry and replaced it with a lease on a shiny new Mercedes. The Merc cost a lot more, but when she totaled that, the scrap value on the two cars was pretty much the same. So the moral of the story is, learn from my mistake, don't lend Auntie Beryl your Camry.
What's going on here?
Even before Battlestar Galactica's cancellation, Glenn A. Larson and Galactica supervising producer Donald P. Bellisario knew that any second season would have to bring down the costs significantly, and the producers had ideas about where to swing the axe to reduce costs, with several characters likely to be either cut or recast. And also, the network really wanted the colonial fleet to pull out its finger and find Earth.
I think we better get down on the ground.
In a space series, practically every costume and prop has to be made from scratch. Though if the colonial fleet found Earth in contemporary times, then the bulk of the series could be shot around LA locations without expensive custom props, costumes, and there would be a need for fewer special effects.
Centurion survival unlikely.
Galactica 1980 was originally meant to be set a few years after the end of the original series. Richard Hatch and Dirk Benedict were asked back to play their characters, Apollo and Starbuck respectively, but both either passed on the roles they were being offered or were unavailable. And so the timeline was changed to 30 years after the end of Battlestar Galactica's final episode. Apollo's died in the meantime, and so there are new characters drafted in to replace him and Starbuck. Troy is an even starchier version of Apollo, and Dillon has absolutely no roguishness to his character, aside from making occasional witty observations.
Talk about primitive. Haven't you people ever heard of anti-gravity travel?
The timeline from, hey kids, let's put on a show, to the show actually being put on was something like about 4 weeks. The original order was for a one-off movie showing Galactica finding Earth, but ABC soon ordered a full series, which, like its older brother, meant writers and crew had to scramble to get things going. The opening movie, Galactica Discovers Earth, was instead turned into the first 3 episodes of this series, showing Dillon and Troy landing on Earth, meeting Jamie, and then all 3 travel back to 1944 to deal with Xavier.
Oh, it's a simple internal combustion engine. It turns a drive shaft. It rotates wheels.
The show's time slot lent itself to having an educational bent.
But didn't one of the biggest newspaper men in this country start the Spanish-American War just to make headlines?
Which shows itself in Jamie being a walking expert on history, or at least to the level of somebody who'd always win at Trivial Pursuit. Xavier's gone back to Nazi Germany to help them with the V2 rockets in order to accelerate man's technological development, and then in the present he escapes and is now set up as a recurring villain.
Uh-oh!
The network, however, decided they didn't want the time travel aspects, and so then we had the Scouts, who because of their upbringing in space could jump higher and throw a ball faster. Looks cool and all, I just wonder how many child stuntmen were hospitalised during this shoot.
This isn't going to be easy, is it?
After all of the changes as a result of cast availability, network feedback, an early evening time slot requiring educational content and no violence, and the lower budget, There is a feeling that the new series was done more out of a professional obligation rather than a creative desire.
Yes, I know.
Glenn A. Larson wasn't initially interested in reviving Galactica in this way, but in general, no producer would turn down an order for episodes.
Either you work with us, or your mission's over.
Galactica was one show that Larson always seemed to be closest to, where he would write and rewrite a number of scripts for the series. Though there's also a sense among those that worked on the series, and of course viewers, that Galactica 1980 was an easier way to give ABC the middle finger compared to covering their headquarters in toilet paper.
We can't do that.
Maybe just sending a letter would have been cheaper.
I love children. Very much.
Xavier would be recast but would only make one more appearance. There is no replacement villain, though there would be minor annoyances like Jamie's boss at the television station inconveniently covering stories that involve the Galacticans in some way, plus there's the ongoing threat from a variety of Air Force officers, each convinced that they've got some sort of aliens on their hands, but of course the Air Force will never get the evidence it's looking for, and they would have too if it wasn't for those lousy kids.
I believe we are dealing with aliens of another world.
Most episodes end with a disclaimer telling the audience that the Air Force had looked into it but found absolutely no proof of the existence of aliens, despite the fact that people watching Battlestar Galactica would probably have found the idea of aliens really cool. So while the card is meant to be reassuring, its oddly insistent tone feels like the twist at the end of a Twilight Zone episode.
Marconi sent the letter S across the English Channel back in 1901.
The early evening time slot meant restrictions on violent acts, so in Galactica 1980, people are rarely shown to have died, there are no fistfights, but there are lots of chases and things being blown up or demolished. That early evening slot meant many battles with network censors over what constituted a violent act.
I don't like the drift of this.
I mean, punching a horse is a violent act, while punching a toaster was not. Unless, of course, you count the second-degree burns.
That's a good idea. That way we could avoid violence.
Kent McCord came from the Jack Webb School of Acting, which is just get in and say the lines with no fuss, which didn't necessarily work well with Robyn Douglas's process for her trying to find a character, which does seem a challenge when Jamie's character was more underwritten than an insurance fraud.
Why didn't you say so? I thought you were Bigfoot or something.
Bigfoot. What is Bigfoot?
Barry Van Dyke seems to have enjoyed himself working on the series, despite his character having only slightly more scope for emotion than Troy.
And I'd like to see those other segments of that entertainment we interrupted.
Dillon.
At a kid's birthday party, Jamie would be the one booking the clown and making sure the kids don't get sick from eating too much candy. Dillon would be the cool uncle who volunteers to take over for the clown when the guy they hired was hit by a golf buggy on the way to the party. And Troy would be the one leaving sour one-star Google reviews for the clown after he later succumbed to his injuries.
He cannot do that!
Having the show set on Earth meant the stories could revolve around Earthbound problems, farmers being run off their land, or pollution, or a baseball game. After the galaxy-spanning adventures of Battlestar Galactica, Galactica 1980 really does feel like small potatoes in comparison. Even with the scenes on Galactica reinforcing the danger and the importance of Troy and Dillon's mission, it does feel like we're watching a tame rehearsal for 80 shows like Knight Rider and the A-Team. And that's not to say that Galactica 1980 is at all on the same level as those shows. You could just see the familiar elements that producers of these shows would often fall back on.
Willie, do you know what it means to keep a military secret?
If after 9 episodes that you could tell at a distance which one was Dillon and which one was Troy, then you perhaps have been watching entirely too much Galactica 1980. Up until now, Dr. Z was just there to set the scene for Adama and outline the immediate conflict to the viewers. Dr. Z, a child genius, was a cliche that never ever ever got old. Sorry, I misread that. That word wasn't cliche but pubic lice. But anyway, in the 10th and ultimately final episode, Dr. Z's origins would be revealed in a flashback story.
It was a dream about a great warrior. His name was Starbuck.
Okay, now that I've got your attention, Dirk Benedict returned to show us what happened to Starbuck.
Morning, fellas.
And it's not the happiest of endings for Galactica's favourite character. Starbuck crash lands on a deserted planet and rebuilds a damaged Cylon Centurion to have some company.
Starbuck, I have brought you a surprise.
An ethereal woman shows up. She's not too forthcoming with answers and of course turns out to be pregnant. At the end, the makeshift vessel is launched and her baby will of course go on to become Dr. Z, while Starbuck will stay behind on the planet, where, well, he's not heard from again.
The answer is still out there. amongst the stars.
So after a few watchable episodes, and more than a few really awful episodes, here is a brilliant episode that has absolutely no business being in this series.
You humans are emotional about our having destroyed you.
Glenn A. Larson wrote an episode that thankfully ignored many of the edicts he's been given for Galactica 1980.
I give you 10 Earth hours.
Galactica 1980 premiered on ABC in January of that year, less than 8 months after the final episode of Battlestar Galactica aired. Galactica 1980 itself would air its 10th and final episode in May of that year. Viewer response was mixed at best, even when it was aimed at a distinctly younger audience than its older brother.
Then of what use is it?
It was cancelled just as the 11th episode was in production, where the series would have returned to its earthbound adventures with Jamie, Dillon and Troy in an episode involving a time travel plot and the return of Xavier. It is very easy to say that Galactica 1980 is crap.
Unbelievable.
But wait, we're not done yet. It is easy to say that Galactica 1980 is crap, but that is a sweeping generalization. Much of it is incredibly underdone compared to its big brother series, but the two-part story, The Night the Cylons Landed, is a fun adventure, while the final episode, The Return of Starbuck, is just an excellent episode. The show was still relatively expensive to make despite the earthbound setting and the constant recycling of effects footage from Battlestar Galactica. But despite the expense, and compared to the original series, Galactica 1980 gives off the vibe of being a cheap and inexpensive show.
Some kind of attempt at crude artistic expression.
Saving money, of course, is not a terrible goal, but you can take things too far. Much like the time I tried to buy cheap tickets to see U2 play live, but it turns out it was just some lousy U2 tribute band called, what was it? Coldplay.
Those automobiles sure don't move very fast.
No, but it's a nice, neat formation. Must require a lot of practice and discipline.
Finding Earth was meant to be the franchise's salvation, but instead proved to be the death of it. The cast are just adequate. The show can be amusing at times, but it's never laugh-out-loud funny. And man, those kids can be sometimes really painful to watch. There are times when Galactica 1980 feels like a live-action Saturday morning show, though one with a much bigger budget. Now that is not meant as a diss to Saturday morning shows, or as a compliment to Galactica 1980.
But you don't really believe there's anything to this, womb.
The next question is, who is to blame, if anyone, for how Galactica 1980 turned out? Was it the network, the studio, the time slot, Larson, or whoever? Well, the blame for a failed series is like Aunt Edna's infamous fish salad at a barbecue. There is more than enough to go around for everyone, whether you want it or not. Glenn A. Larson and Stu Phillips' Galactica theme is again used, with a slightly anemic recording laid over every piece of stock footage they could find from the original series. The actual music for the show is closer to that of a contemporary action series, Battlestar Galactica music mixed in with a TV-friendly pop sound. Of course, while Galactica 80 seemed to wring even more use out of the expensive effects from the original series, there were times when new effects were needed. The first episode overlaid Cylon raiders over footage from Earthquake, while the scenes of the Vipers travelling in time was new. Later episodes saw the effects team show a bit more confidence in creating new effects footage of, say, a Cylon raider or Galactica's new flying saucer-shaped transport vessel. Troy and Dillon have various laser pistols, and of course they have the flying bikes. If you've never seen Galactica 1980 but like the original series, it's possibly worth watching at least once.
Must be that junk food I'm eating.
To experience the sheer awfulness. But you could actually skip most of the series and just watch The Return of Starbuck and enjoy that.
Can you dig it? Oh, quite possibly.
My first taste of Galactica 1980 was actually in a theatre when it was released locally as a third Battlestar Galactica feature. Conquest of the Earth cobbled together scenes from several episodes, notably the first episodes and The Night the Cylons Landed. Later on, when the full series was screened where I lived in a school holiday afternoon time slot, it was billed as Battlestar Galactica Season 2, and I took an instant dislike to it. I've seen many comments in Battlestar Galactica related posts where a large number of OG Battlestar fans really hate Galactica 1980.
What are you guys, Martians?
Close. When you know why it is the way it is, you know, the kid-focused time slot and lower budget, then it all makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make it any better, it just makes sense.
None of this is easy.
Galactica 1980 really does lose a lot of what made Battlestar Galactica so memorable. Galactica 1980 lacks interesting characters, interesting situations, and is almost completely devoid of any charm of its own, which are 3 criticisms Netflix also leveled at my comedy special just before they bought it. In the end, Galactica 1980 only lasted 10 episodes, barely longer than an extended course of antibiotics. Battlestar Galactica was beloved by its adoring fans, and its cast were pretty keen on finding a way to continue with it. Richard Hatch would later try and get a continuation of the original series, which most likely would have ignored the existence of Galactica 1980. That's a smart move. Despite comics and books and fan fiction, Galactica 1980 and the Return of Starbuck is where the original version of Battlestar Galactica ends. Though, it would be nice if we went and took a look at all of the individual episodes of both Battlestar Galactica and Galactica 1980 as a sort of way to wrap up our look at the series.
Why not?
Good. Good.
At least before we get stuck into another rewatch. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.